will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Can I remind you to switch the microphone on when you're speaking, and don't forget to turn it off when you've finished. Minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of January. I propose that the minutes held on the 27th of January are taken as read, confirmed and signed. All in agreement?
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 2, question time. I've received questions from Mr. John Marriott on behalf of CPRE under Standing Order 34. I'll shortly invite Mr. Marriott to the table. Everyone should have a copy of the questions, so these can be taken as read. Mr. Marriott can ask supplementary questions on any of the questions that he's submitted, but we can only take one supplementary question per question, and I'd highlight that it needs to clarify the response that's already been given and not raise new issues. I understand there was some question about why it's come here. Took advice from the officers on that. The officers decide where questions, which body questions go to when they come in. But this is really about climate change. It's wider than just highways and transport. And just to remind members that the overall response, the overall climate change brief is being scrutinised by this committee because it's overarching and covers the work of the whole council. So the view is taken that this is more about climate change than just environment and transport. Mr. Marriott, would you like to come up? Just there, please. So you've got the answers to your questions as provided by the officers. Would you like some supplementary questions?
Thank you very much for inviting me to the meeting. I've read most of the answers, and I do find that obviously they're very short answers and don't really answer the questions or say that they will be something may happen in the future to address them. I think the only one I really want to follow up at this stage is item 4. On the basis of the plan is essentially about seeking infrastructure, large amounts of infrastructure, to build more roads. It appears to be mostly more roads, and it's about the effect of what can be done to actually reduce the growth of traffic. I know it talks about emissions and things like that, but it is more than just emissions, climate change. It's about all sorts of things, about the way we behave. And so I do see it very much as very important that we put more effort into improving public transport. Now, I know that's extremely difficult, but I just wonder if you made any estimate of the amount that improving public transport could have on reducing the growth of traffic.
Okay, that's a very good point. Mr. Veers, would you like to come up to the table? Now, we have the option of you being able to answer some of that supplementary, but of course there is also the ability to send a written response to the questioner if there are issues that you'd like to go away and think about or look at in more detail, or are you happy to? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think Mr. Marriott raises some really interesting questions that a lot of us are quite interested to see what comes up in the government's bus strategy that's supposed to be announced in the summer. There's £5 billion supposedly of funding going to be linked with that. For considerable time, I think for the last 10 years whilst working here, we've been very successful in bringing in large amounts of money to do behavioural change programmes for bus schemes such as the A426 that is mentioned in the response, and for walking and cycling infrastructure. However, we would like to do an awful lot more, and we will be looking very closely at the opportunities that will present themselves in the government's new bus strategy, which also includes walking and cycling. Also, as part of any of our road schemes, which we've also been successful in bidding for, we're always looking at where the opportunities to improve public transport, walking and cycling are also taken as well as general environmental issues. As regard to the last question on have we got an estimate of the amounts that could be changed, well, no, that would be something we'd work through when we saw the detail of what we could possibly get from the government towards that. Anything I'm sure we'll go for will be a competitive bidding process, which will go through a normal looking at that sort of criteria, what's basically the amount of benefit you get for the cost. what I am quite pleased to say as well is, and I know Mr. Marriott has some interest in this area, is our integrated transport models that we use, we are already expanding them to see how we can take better looks at the carbon agenda and the impacts of any schemes that are being done, and we are working with the Department for Transport on that as well, as we are one of the leading authorities in the country.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Feard. That will be sent to you in copy of that response in writing as well as a follow-up.
Just ask one question, which is...
Which one does it relate to?
It still relates to number 4, or the end of your answer to number 4, which was about the LLSTP, which is out for consultation. I did raise the question of that it doesn't seem to be that the City Council are consulting on that.
Do you have a specific response to that, Ian, or is that a matter for the City Council?
Obviously, the two organisations, while it's a joint document we're taking out, are taking different approaches to how we're engaging with our public on that. We are going out for full consultation to the public, and people can feed in, and any comments about the city or the county part of the documentation will be fed through to ourselves, and we can discuss with the city. It is up to them,
their consultation. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, okay, right, we'll move on then to question from members. There aren't any. Under Standing Orders 7.3 and 7.5. There are no urgent items to take. Item 4, which will need to be taken elsewhere on the agenda. Declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. I'm not sure. There's nothing specific about district councils. There's some references in the finance report to district councils. Does anybody want to declare an interest, or probably not necessary today? Okay. Any members wish to declare the party whip? No. Item 7, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 35. There are no petitions. That takes us to the first item on the agenda today, consultation on the Equality Strategy 2020. We've got Gordon McFarlane, Chair of the Corporate Equalities Board and Assistant Director for Corporate Services, and Donna Worship, Policy Manager, to present this report. Would you like to kick off, Gordon?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Chair. It's quite a long report, but I'll just run through the kind of main points of it, because I know you've had the opportunity to read it. We have an equality strategy that is refreshed and renewed every 4 years, and we've been consulting widely, as the report details, on our new equality strategy, which will run from this year to 2024, and taking the opportunity to seek the views of the Commission on the consultation feedback that we've had, the broad framework for the strategy, and the initial action plan that we've created, which will be a single-year action plan to support the strategy, and we'll have a refreshed action plan each year. 1C, you can see that the strategy then goes through to Cabinet in April and full Council in May. Policy framework and previous decisions, effectively just describing obligation to have an equality strategy in place, and the fact that it needs to be refreshed now. And then paragraph 4, just around our statutory duties around equalities and diversity, and so some specific duties that we've got under the 2011 regulations, to publish and to measure and to make our objectives accessible to all. So paragraph 5 again provides a bit of context around the kind of policy context around our activity on equality, diversity, community cohesion and human rights. The strategy should set out how we're going to meet our legislative duties, and it's not just about the legislation, it's about what other value-added work we're going to do, both internally, inward facing to the Council, but also externally in our service delivery, so looking at employees and looking at residents and service users, and very much looking at where we've been in the previous strategy and learning from that, looking at progress that we've made, and then informing the detail of the new strategy. So I think in terms of paragraphs 8 and 9, what we've done is we've put some examples in around progress that we've made. I'll not read them all because they're hopefully fairly clearly set out, but progress that we've made and specific actions that we've taken in the current strategy. And you get a feel through those bullet points of the focus that the current strategy has had and the supporting work that we've done. So that takes us through to consultation and engagement. There's an extensive consultation exercise which ran for 12 weeks from November to February. And I think colleagues have worked really hard on trying to get as much feedback as possible from a wide range of stakeholders, both internally and externally, partners and others. And you can certainly see that we've had a range of ways of consulting as well, from putting surveys out to and questions out, face-to-face meetings, and certainly a lot of attempts were made to gather feedback and get comment. So you can see paragraphs 10, 11, maybe 12 set out how we've approached consultation. Paragraph 13 sets out the sort of general support from the feedback that we've had for the general aims and direction of the new strategy, given that more detailed work was still needed to be done on it, and then making some suggestions around some specific things that we could think about. And then paragraph 14 really sort of sets out some of the value-adding comments that we've had around additional things that perhaps we can do, which just help to bring the strategy to life, to make it real, rather than it just being a dusty document, which is the last thing we want it to be. So we've gone through just a little bit of detail from paragraphs 15 onwards around the methodology, just to give you some assurance about how we've approached consultation, the groups that we've tried to reach and get feedback from, and the opportunities that people have had to feedback. So that paragraphs 15 to 20 really summarise what we've tried to do. And in paragraph 21, you can see that's resulted in 213 responses, and we've broken down where those responses came from and how they came. So you can see there's quite a wide range of responses that we've had, and certainly over 200 responses in public consultation I think is positive. Paragraph 23, 2 aims of the equality strategy continue to be recognised for leadership and high performance in advancing equality of opportunity, celebrating diversity and inclusion, and wanting Leicestershire to be a place where there is equality of opportunity and good relations with and within its communities. And I think those points are really important, because I think and we've had the conversations over the years, but with diminishing resources, it would be quite easy in this area to go back to what do we need to do to meet our legislative and regulatory requirements. And we wanted to stay more ambitious than that. So the strategies that we've had up to now and this strategy very much set out an ambition for the County Council and for the community as well. And I think that's just an important point to note. So paragraph 26 just sets out, and again I'll not read them here, but the 5 proposed equality objectives. So really summarising which objectives and which themes and the focus that we intend to have through the new strategy. We can come back to those. About 75% of all respondents supported those objectives, so again some mandate for that. And we had some common themes in the comments as well, and paragraph 28 summarises those in terms of, I think it was a really good point of considering the practical effect or the practical impact of the strategy and objectives. So how's it going to land? What impact will it have? How we will define, measure and communicate progress and outcomes, which again, really important point to make, and something that we've been working on over the life of the previous strategies. And have we got actual or perceived gaps in evidence, practice, delivery that could inhibit us achieving objectives? So it's great to have these wide-ranging objectives, but what are the practicalities? Are we set up to to resource those and to achieve them. And then paragraph 29, again, just a summary of suggestions on other relevant equality objectives or work streams that we could consider. And I think what we can do is we can build those into the overarching objectives that we've got when we come to the action plan. So we asked people about whether we communicated in the right way through consultation as well, because I think that was quite important. And again, paragraph 31, high level of support for the wide range of methods that we'd used. Inevitably, paragraph 33, just to draw your attention, there were a small number of people who had a negative view about us consulting, about the strategy in its own right. And I think if we contextualise that against the positive and constructive comments, I think when it's as wide-ranging as it was, that's probably inevitable. So changes we've made, and this looks quite light, because I think it really endorses that perhaps we've got the strategy largely right, and then the detailed changes come in the action plans. But you can see paragraph 34, slight redrafting of the aims, and then paragraphs 35 and 36, just very small adjustments to two of the objectives. And I'd really take that as an endorsement that actually the way we're pitching the strategy and the objectives is positive, constructive, and it's what people wanted to see. So we've got a number of areas that we'll cover in the action plan. So there's a draft version of an action plan which we've enclosed. I think it's Appendix B, and paragraphs 37 to 45 just summarise those areas and the things that we believe are important to focus on in year one of the new strategy, and the action plan reflects those. We will continue to work on the action plan as we get to a final sign-off in May and continue to hone that. But I just thought it was worth highlighting, just for your information, that the focus, getting better evidence and using the evidence and applying the evidence is an extremely important starting point. We've been improving that over the years, but there's still a need. We can't be complacent about it. There's still a need to improve our capability to monitor, to understand, and report on our equalities data. That's the backdrop to good decision making. Staff progression, black and minority ethnic, or black Asian minority ethnic staff progression, something that we've been working with the workers group on, because you can see from the text that on the face of it, we're an attractive employer. People apply from BAME groups, but there is a bit of a drop-off when we get through to shortlisting and appointment. So we've been trying to understand that, working with the workers group to understand that, putting a range of measures in place, including training of panels, having representative recruitment panels, etc. So that's a priority for this coming year. Improving our equality and human rights impact assessment work. Again, we've done some, you probably recall over the last couple of years, done some training for different member groups on EHRIAs, and what we need to do is to again bring these to life and make them a bit more, a bit easier to use and a bit easier to interpret, so that it's not just filling in a template. It's actually a properly thought through process, but the paperwork helps us with that. So that's something that we'll focus on this year. Accessibility of information, again, both internally and externally, is really important, and that's something that we'll focus on. And then I think a really helpful point that people made is, let's celebrate success. Let's show good leadership around equalities, inclusion, diversity, and let's also celebrate success. So we're building that into our action planning as well. So as I say, the action plan, as it stands at the moment, it sits at Appendix B, and the draft equality strategy is at A, and the EHRIA that we conducted, which was no more than a screening, because we believe there'll be a positive impact, and so there should be, is at Appendix C. Okay.
Okay, thank you for that comprehensive introduction. We've got a number of questions that members like to ask you. Rosita, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. First of all, congratulations, very comprehensive document, but just a couple of questions for clarification first before I make some comments. Clarification one, next year we have got a census coming up. So why have we got the equality strategy at this point rather than later? Secondly, we refer in this document on page 33 and earlier on always to LGBT, Black and disabled staff groups. Why haven't we got BME? Why do we refer to it just Black? Identify that term for me. And because I think language has got to be very, there's got to be a good emphasis on language. And my third point for information, please, it is why haven't we got any points of discrimination of age in here? Because ageism is a very large point of discrimination, and if we're looking at the amount of staff who are employed, who are over a certain age, so if you could answer those first, then we look at members and I come back later. Thank you.
Switch this on. First point around the census is we have a duty to publish a refreshed strategy and a new strategy, so we have to stick to that timetable. I think the point around the census is really helpful, but it takes some time for the census to be conducted and then for the results to be available. So I think we'd probably be into the following year before the full census results were available. So that it just doesn't fit with the timetable, but obviously as soon as they're available, we'll be able to use those results in our annual action plan. Point around LGBT, Black, disabled workers groups, we're absolutely right, we need to be consistent, and I've talked about BAME, so Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic, and the group has just changed their name to that. I think it's just a consistency point in the report, but we are starting to talk about BAME as opposed to just Black. So we need to be absolutely consistent on that.
If I may come back, because surely can we clarify the term Black, because Black is Afro-Caribbean, isn't it? So if we are talking and if we are equal, then we need to make sure and not disadvantage in setting up groups and whatever. So how is it going to be addressed positively throughout the strategy?
I think one of the key things is to work with the workers groups around language that's used. And for example, we work with the LGBT group, which LGBT plus, because there are other definitions. So starting to use that terminology, and I think it's the same with what will now be the BAME group, and we will work with them around how we really publicise that group, how we use supporting information, etc. So that, and again, and we need to be absolutely consistent and understand the terminology that we mean, and socialise that across the council and externally. Age was the third point, and I think absolutely relevant to ask ourselves the question around any potential age discrimination, within the council. You mentioned employees. We're not picking up through our data monitoring and gathering that there are any particular age discrimination concerns, but it's something that we have to be aware of, and that means that's not one of the priorities that we would focus on this year. I hope it doesn't become a concern, but if it does, we would clearly have that one as one of our future priorities.
Okay, Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that last point on age, if you turn to page 35, there's a chart there, breakdown of the age profile of the workforce. It does seem to be skewed towards the 40 40 plus, like the younger age groups seem to be underrepresented. So maybe challenge your point you've just made on age discrimination and how we can interpret that. I think there's some welcoming news in the report as well about under the race section there, about 14.3% employees from BAME backgrounds compared to, I think, is it 9% of the population of Leicestershire as a whole. So I guess my follow-up question really is around how do you judge the success of the strategy? And we've got lots of statistics here that show you can interpret them in different ways. One way you could interpret that is saying that actually, the white population is underrepresented. So how would you judge the success of the strategy in terms of what we're trying to achieve for equality for all different groups?
Just to pick up the first point around breakdown of the workforce, you're absolutely right. The age profile jumps out. It's not dissimilar from many other local authorities. I think there is always a challenge in local authorities around attracting younger people into the workforce. I think the apprenticeship levy has helped with that, for example. And we're seeing a little bit of a shift in under 20s and 20 to 29. One of our challenges is how we retain people and how we create career paths for people, etc. I think the challenge back would be, despite the breakdown of the workforce that we've got there, what I don't see is anything discriminatory going on. I think we have to look at the types of jobs that the types of jobs that we have, the types of jobs that people are attracted to, the age profile, and actually whether we can advertise.
All right, Peter.
Sorry, you were asking. Sorry. It was just on the second point, on in regards to interpreting statistics and ensuring equality across all different groups.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. It's something that we monitor on a regular basis at the Equalities Board. So the issue around BAME staff and representation, we actually use data from the Leicester and Leicestershire workforce area. So the population statistics are slightly different for that area than they are for the county on its own. And therefore our target for BME representation is actually at 14.5%. And we're working towards that target, and obviously particularly at the more senior grades. That's why that's been highlighted as a particular area that we think there's a bit of a gap and that we need to put some targeted intervention into that area. So it's because we're looking at, because of the location, particularly of County Hall, and the proximity to Leicester, we actually draw statistics from the Leicestershire workforce area.
Just to follow that up, how would you then ensure that there is equality across all? So, for example, if the statistics showed that there was an underrepresentation of the white workforce, how would you ensure that the strategy addresses that too? Because that's just as important, equality across all different groups. How would you respond to that?
I mean, I think you make a really valid point there, and actually certainly on BAME staff, that's not an issue for us at the moment. We don't have representation of BAME staff, which would mean that we would need to be targeting sort of white workforce. It's more of an issue for male-female, if I'm honest. And there are certain parts of the council where male-female splits are not representative, and that's areas that we're targeting. And obviously in a lot of the care roles, the focus is a very dominated female workforce, and in other parts of the council we've got a very male-dominated workforce. And those issues are picked up within those departments specifically because they are very specific to those particular parts of the council.
Just to finish that one off, I think it's probably a fairly obvious point for me to make with an HR hat on, that we can take positive action. We can think about where we advertise. We can try to reach underrepresented groups in lots of different ways. Ultimately, we should be appointing on merit, and that's just an important underpinning point that perhaps you'd expect me to say.
Okay, Hilary Fryer.
Thank you very much. Again, a very interesting thing. I was going to pick up just what the officer has just said. I don't like positive discrimination. I never have. In my past, I've worked with 20 or 40 men, and I've been the only woman. I didn't feel I was discriminated at all. It should be on merit, not where you come from, what colour you are, what age you are, purely on merit. And that is equality. That's giving equality to people. But my question, I'd like to come back to the consultation methodology, which started on paragraph 15 on page 19 and then moves over the page. I think the officers and the council have done their very best to reach out to as many people as they can through posters. I mean, just using the brief figures, just doing it on social media, Twitter and Facebook, it went out to 390,000 people. What I think is disappointing, and it always is in any of the surveys we seem to do, is that we got 213 responses, of which 142 worked for the council. So one could say that's not equality. One could look at it the other way. If we went out to 600 and odd thousand people one way and another, and only 213 came back, well then they must think our equality is fine, and there are no problems. Because if they had a problem, they would be that was an opportunity to come and say, I'm being discriminated against, or you're not even. So you could twist it round the other way, but I don't think people now, unless they are unhappy, answer any consultations anywhere, whether I was consulting on whether they like my dog or not. You know, you have to work on the principle, if I don't get a response, it's good. But I don't think there's very much more you could have done. But I do think we must emphasise more on its equality for people, not different groups, and it is on merit. Thank you.
I think that's really a statement. Do you want to add anything?
No, it's just the only thing I would say is for us, it's also about the quality of the feedback, so how constructive the comments are, and the quality of the feedback, and hopefully we've summarised that in the report, which gives us something legitimate to build on.
Okay. Alan Pearson.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a few questions, some observation questions, just going through. Words are very important, and definitely page 17, we're using words like disabled people, disabled first. I think one group, Adult Social Service, we changed that to people with disabilities, so they're people first. In fact, all these people are people. We use the term gay, trans, whatever. They're people first. This is what we're here for. So I think we need to be careful how we label, because labelling can be used to actually discriminate and change. That's number one. So I do feel we need to look at that. The other, which I do feel we're missing out on, I'm part of a group where we don't do surveys the way you do it. We're doing surveys, that's why we're getting the results. They don't work. So I don't know why we continue to do surveys the way we're doing it. I don't understand why we do lists. So the hypothesis is we already know sometimes what we want. I think we've got to start really looking at the narrative approach of meeting people face to face and getting their experiences, their stories of how they live in our communities, in our workplace. So therefore we get a clearer message, so we're not actually dictating the way they go forward. So I'd like to see somewhere that we can follow that through, that we look at other ways.
I think you did raise this before.
I've done it a number of times.
The whole process on which we undertake consultation, which is largely web-based now, as you rightly say, and I agree, it's time we had a look at the wider issue.
We're spending a lot of money, Chair.
Joe Morrison heads up that team. Is it? Caroline Boucher.
And I'm quite happy to contact me because I'm part of a group that's doing this. So.
I think we'll try and agenda this for a future discussion and a paper to look at the principles of how the County Council conducts consultation. Because you're right, you raised this before, and are we getting the best range of responses possible.
Can I continue? Thank you, Chair. Just some other.
All right.
Another issue that frightens me a little bit is we have a term, I think, page 17, hidden disabilities. Can I assure you, a lot of people are quite happy to hide their disabilities. Particularly, I've worked with people with multiple sclerosis that a high percentage of them manage their lives, don't want to be interfered with, don't want to tell anybody that they've got a disability and want to get on with their lives. So we have to draw a line, does that make sense, sometimes, of how we get information and what we use. And that frightens me, hidden disabilities. It conjures up that we're trying to dredge and get as much information. I know we're not, but I think we need a better term, hidden disabilities. And finally, something that is current in regard to the question that we have, where do we stand, and it's not mentioned in there, particularly some of the transgender impact on female sport. That's an issue. I just don't know. I'm pretty chilled, but where do we stand on this? And that could also impact on work in sport or performance or whatever. And I'd like to think that we could sort of find out a little bit more where we stand as a county on those issues. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, just briefly, I think the last 2 points are in hidden disabilities to start with. So I've used the example of autism, something that is becoming increasingly understood, but is not visible to other people. And we've certainly had a couple of conferences for staff and other interested parties for people with hidden disabilities, just exploring the complexities around that and how we can help make things more transparent, better understood, give managers the right support so that they're able to have sensible conversations and thought through conversations with colleagues who perhaps do have hidden disabilities, but I can see how the term can be misinterpreted. Just on transgender, I think it's probably fair to say we're still developing our understanding of the trans agenda. We do have a trans policy, which is in place and has been in place since last year. The Stonewall Index, which is referenced in the report, has much more of a focus on trans and has done probably for the last year. And I think that's really helpful for organisations as they develop their understanding of some of the complexities around trans issues.
Okay, fine. The hidden disability, you've explained that well. One of my concerns is that the visual disability, a lot of people with physical, obvious disabilities are absolutely brilliant and can work. We've got an issue at the moment where we're keeping students back to schools to 25 because we can't place them in work. And some of these people have got skills, as we're aware. So one of the issues we need to look at, if we're going to be fair and honest, is that we are failing this population of people. There's not much work for them. It's educating workforce, etc. Because there is, obviously, if we're not placing them in work, there's nowhere for them to go. That's a form of discrimination. And a lot of them have skills. And it's just sometimes the obvious is making sure the obvious is people understand, well, actually, lots of people, we all look different, but have got lots of different skills, and that's important. But I do feel we've got a massive challenge on with young people with disabilities and placing them in work, because it's very difficult, I know, but it's not happening, and that's why we've gone on to 25. We've extended that year. So we need to look at that here and now, sooner or later, because if it carries on, we'll have a whole population of people with disabilities not able to work, and I think that would be a shame.
I'm just going to say, I think that's really helpful feedback, and it can absolutely feed into the work we do, and we've certainly had a priority work stream around colleagues with disabilities, whether those are visible disabilities or hidden disabilities, and just trying to work on some of the items that you're talking about, so we can build that in.
Okay, I've still got 5 speakers, so I'm going to draw the list under that. Dan Harrison, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know people have mentioned already, Chairman, about the consultation. But when I look at that report and then look at the actual involvement of people, I think it's very, very poor. Now, I don't speak as a critic as such. I speak as somebody who ran a marketing company, a public company, who understands contacting people. The whole thing has a good emphasis, and there's lots of things to be admired, and there's only one person sitting this side of the bench with one of these that I wear all the time. I declare my attitude towards everybody, looking at everybody I meet, whether it's the public or staff here or members, colleagues. I have a view and I express it with my lanyard. So, you know, I'm not just, you know, that's me. But this as a piece of work is so weak, and why have you put all of this good stuff in jeopardy with these words of how it's been involved? I look at 6,196 people and the small response from them. When we're doing things for the public, you have to reach out. There are lots of methods. There's phoning, there's meeting people. You've got to have a proper contact plan. I don't believe there's been a contact plan, yet this is a valuable statement document. And it's a document of attitude and how we care and how we want to project this to the community. But hey, we haven't talked to the community, 100,000 people, 700,000 people in our shire responsibility, and we end up with 230. So fundamentally, I think this is very good, how the depth and detail and the understanding, but your marketing contact is appalling. I don't mean that disrespectful. This is awful. This is what some local club would do.
I think we've touched on that, though, haven't we? I suspect they're following the process, the policy process, in way in which the county council. So you're raising a wider issue that Alan raised.
I'm raising my concern because this document's here in front of me, and this is how they've deployed it and the results of that deployment. I'm talking about actuality, and I'm saying, from my perspective, it's very sad. This is a terrific story and a proposition to put to people, but we're not connecting. So what is this all about?
But this isn't the only consultation where it's come back with very low
No, Mr.
numbers.
Chairman, but I'm only addressing one. You might criticise people who say, well, hang on, stick. This is in front of me today. This is the agenda. And I'm able to say, through professional experience, I think it's poor and it needs to be improved. Now, that's not disparaging to the staff members here, because that would be unkind. I want to create a stimulus, but we need to sit down and say, how do we do it? A good story, a good report. But, you know, when we're only communicating with that number of people...
Let's ask Gordon, are you following a process here, or do you have latitude to engage with the way you best think you can get people to respond, or are you simply following a policy?
I think it's both. I think there is a...
Sorry? Oh, sorry.
There is a process, but clearly when we've thought about which groups to target, that gives us some latitude. And I think, just saying to Donna, of the 230 responses, several of those would have been group responses. So we've been able to access and get feedback from interested groups, so it's not 230 individuals. I think, as the Chair said, there's a wider point around consultation methodology as a council. But I think one of the challenges that we have with any strategy, but taking the equality strategy, is how we, without coming up with a cliche, how we make it everybody's business, how people connect, either through consultation or actually through the life of the strategy. And that's an ongoing challenge. So if I look internally, how do we make sure that staff across the council think about equality and think about inclusion, etc., as part of their job, and think externally, as you know, those who are delivering services externally, are they thinking about equality of service, inclusivity of service, etc. So those are the types of challenges that I think we've got, regardless of the specific consultation point.
Terry Einan.
Thank you, Chair. And at this point, I think, having heard the discussion, I'm going to declare a personal non-pecuniary interest in that I have a disabled son who would very much like to work for this council and has applied on several occasions and is as yet not employed by this council. But I think from my my personal experience, this council, compared with many other employers in Leicestershire, is absolutely exemplary in the way that it deals with equalities, and I think this document is something to be celebrated. I'm pleased that you went out to those particular groups to get their engagement. I think that's very important. I don't see the National Autistic Society, which it would have been nice to see, because that is a particular issue for me, with only 14% of people on the autistic spectrum in employment, and many of them having skills that would possibly be useful. But you do have to use your autistics appropriately, because they don't work well they're not liable to be flexible. That is not their feature. But coming back to the paper itself, I think one of the issues I'd like to raise is raised by a couple of the consultation responses, which is about whether or not we should be using the term equity rather than equality. And I think this is brought up on page 22, paragraph 30, and in the document itself, this is one of those confusing terms one has to Google sometimes. We haven't explained these terms on page 39. And I think it does to me come across a bit muddled as a strategy, because we haven't explained the difference between those two terms. And in fact, in many ways, this equality strategy does take account of equity, but I don't think we made it clear. For example, on page 16, paragraph 8, we talk about helping people in a proportionate way. We talk on page 21, paragraph 26, of equality of outcome. And in the objectives, 2 of them, 1 and 3, both would meet the criteria for equity, as in it's about equality of outcome. We're measuring the results, rather than the problem I have then is on page 28, we say equal treatment reduces barriers of access and opportunity. No, it doesn't if you're using an equity attitude to equalities. Equal treatment means giving everyone the same height stool, and that means if you're short, you still can't see over the wall. Equity is, what we need is proportionate treatment. That reduces barriers of access and opportunity. And I think in many ways we're saying that, and I think we need to get our language right to make it clear that that is what we're doing. It's very clear that we are intending to measure outcomes, page 21, paragraph 28, measuring impacts, page 37, improving the equality of outcomes, all very good. So then coming back to my favourite topic of disability, when it comes to outcomes on page 35, for disability, yes, we do need to encourage people, particularly people with hidden disabilities, to lodge that they have one, because otherwise our data is rubbish. What I'm also then wondering is, going forward, outcomes for our disabled workers, how are we going to measure those outcomes? Are we going to be able to, particularly people with hidden disabilities, because it's not kind of good enough to just get disclosure if we're not using that data. We need to be monitoring barriers, for example, to career progression, to retention, the issues that particularly affect disabled workers, or workers with disabilities, Alan Pearson, you're absolutely right, and that they may have all the merit that Mrs. Fryer mentions, but not being able to express it because we are not taking away those barriers to working, particularly, for example, people on the autistic spectrum. Some of our offices would do your head in if you're on the autistic spectrum, but they might well be able to work given a quieter environment, for example.
I think just on the terminology, I think you're absolutely right. Terminology and consistency of terminology is really important. I think we can do a read through and make sure that we're A, using the right terminology, B, that it's consistent, and then we do some explanation of terms. I mean, there is a debate in the background nationally around, should we be talking about diversity, should we talk about inclusion? They mean very different things. So, that was just an example of other debates that are going on, but we can do that as we finalise the strategy and the plan. I think the point around the example that was used was hidden disability, but for any protected characteristic, the better data we've got, the better we are able to monitor. And it is an ongoing challenge in any organisation to get people to tell us and to put on our systems information about personal information about protected characteristics for a whole range of reasons, and we continue to try and increase the sort of validity of the data that we have. that in turn, the better data we have, helps us to measure outcomes and to track in an anonymised way, in an aggregated way, but to help us to track if actually, it goes back to the wider question around how do we know this strategy's working and being successful. We have to use the data so we can improve the data, we can better monitor.
Okay, Terry Richardson.
Thank you, Chairman. It's probably on a not dissimilar theme. I mean, I think we've had some great questions here. I suppose I welcome the report, but I'm hoping it is of its time. And the reason I say that is that when I visit schools and youth councils and other people, and through my own children and grandchildren, you know, they are ethnic, gender, disability blind. They don't see it. No. And that encourages me for the future. Yeah. So my question really is around of having a report in this way where we're categorising people in different groups. It would be interesting to know what the view of youngsters is about, would they see this report this way because they are blind to all these issues? Are we actually starting to encourage them to put people in groups by the nature of how we write the report? Because to me, the report should just be about treating everybody the same and then not worrying about that. I appreciate we probably have to at the moment, but I'm hoping we're working towards a situation where... So I would have liked to have seen what the results were, particularly from the younger end of the spectrum, from the questionnaire responses, to see what their view was about even how we write reports. So do we actually say, you know, we do categorise people into these groups? Because I don't find that with youngsters. I think it's brilliant when you go somewhere and they're not worried whether someone is in a wheelchair, what sex origin they are, whether they're a different colour to them, you know, which I think is wonderful and gives me real hope for the future. So I just wonder what your view is on what sort of timescale might we be able to change the way we write such reports in terms of promoting to our younger people that we don't categorise people, we treat everybody the same, which I think this might move away from. And my second question, and I'm sure Mr. Cross will put me right on this one if I get it wrong, is on the top of page 30, the bullet point where it talks about protection from discrimination. Now, from memory, Article 9.3 of the Human Rights Act says everybody has the right to a fair human life, etc., etc. The bit that never gets quoted, and I think should be here, is Article 9.4, so it's immediately below it, so everybody knows that, says you've only got these rights if you're not infringing on other people's rights. And I do think it's crucial that we don't just talk about people's rights, they also have responsibilities. And I think building responsibilities into this report, particularly on that bullet point alone, is something we should be seen to do. Because we cannot ignore Article 9.4, but I think largely in this country it does get ignored. We're so worried about people's human rights, we forget that in actually exercising their rights, they might be infringing on the rights of other people, and therefore they have a responsibility not to do so. And that's for all of us.
Now you've provoked a legal response, which is what you've said.
I did say that a far bigger expert than me would probably know the right numbers.
Well, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say that actually Mr. Richards made a very fair point, and it's worth actually making. In the courts, if you read the judgments when human rights issues are raised, there are great pains to refer to the balancing exercise that has to be taken in every case. So it's a fair point, and I agree with Mr. Richardson.
Okay, so the key issue is, if there wasn't intervention, would we be as good as Mr. Richardson's saying young people are? As an organisation this size, do we need positive intervention to make these things happen?
I think the strategy is driven from the legislation, so the Equalities Act, a number of protected characteristics, so you can have that as a starting point, a factual starting point. I think it's a really interesting challenge for us, and it comes back to the age profile of the workforce as well, around, and I scribbled down, are people blind to the issue, or are they alive and more accepting, just generally more accepting, because there's still a lot of prejudice in society. But you're right, you could probably argue that younger people are just generally more accepting. I'd say that rather than blind, but and I think for me, it wouldn't be treating everybody the same. It's creating a more level playing field rather than starting from the point of view of treating everybody the same. And it kind of comes back to the point around equity and equality. And I think that just the last point around the human rights issues, I think we can certainly build something in around responsibilities. There are lots of connections we can make to, I don't know, the Employee Code of Conduct, for example. So, you know, we have other documents that will set out responsibilities, but we can make reference to them in this strategy.
Okay. Tom Bartley.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be long, but I think most of the points have been made. But I'm very encouraged by what's gone on and the work that's been done. And you can be as cynical as you like, but I think a lot of it is down to personal attitude in the workforce as well, and how managers and team leaders respond. People are different. We're all different. I think if it hadn't, the work that's been done over generations has resulted in younger people being blind to any, or at least a considerable lack of prejudice or any sort of discrimination. And I think that is genuine, and I think that has been as a result of education and of just basic decency, really. And you know, I applaud the work that's done. I know there's still work to be done, and it will be evolving. Mr. Richardson made the point: is this sort of format of response relevant to a very much younger generation? And I probably think not. I think we're almost getting to the stage where, if we're not careful, we're discriminating by highlighting these groups. I mean, it seems an odd thing to say, but we've got to be very careful what we're doing. Society has moved on, people are more accepting, but there is loads of work still to be done. I very much take your point. I'm not naive enough to think that there isn't discrimination, because there clearly is. But as an organisation, I think we are to be applauded on what we're trying to do, and I'll say no more.
Thank you very much, Chairman. A few things. Most of it relating to page 36. Lots of numbers, lots of statistics, basically on our workforce. The first one really is the top chart, which points out there's basically ethnic group, and my background is I've done a lot of work with statistics and National Health Service and ethnic groups. So I'm really surprised to see that the second description there is null and not obtained, 15.8%. That's quite a lot of people who've not declared. I'm just a bit surprised by that. I can understand perhaps some of the other issues further down the page, sexual orientation and so on, but I really am quite surprised. It's a very standardised way of asking people about their ethnicity. Just a box ticking, really. I'm just quite surprised we even allowed them to have a null and not obtained, actually, almost. The next table, religion and belief, we're not going to go into it, but except I just noticed that the top one, which again is null and not obtained, fine, doesn't have a number next to it. I'm assuming it's about 40 to 50% based on the other numbers, just out of interest. And my next point really is the next box, or next heading, which is sex. Quietly surprised these days that we're using that term. Gender is now more used. And that then comes to the point I make. If people are declaring themselves to be male or female, self-declaration, are we looking perhaps into other issues here about people self-declaring themselves of a particular gender as opposed to it being a birth gender, out of interest? And then the other point, of course, on that particular paragraph is that we seem to be, there are 4,585, according to my calculations, out of the 6,196 members of staff who are female. We're not discriminating against males, I hope. But it does seem that we have very few males. I mean, I was saying earlier to some people, I was at a meeting yesterday with Environment and Transport, 4 members of staff there from Environment and Transport, and all ladies, brilliant. I mean, fantastic, but quite unusual these days. You know, a lot of them are engineers, but fine, great. And finally, and this really is the controversial one, I suppose, should we not be calling this not an equality policy, but a differences policy? We're concentrating an awful lot on all these tables and differences and so on. And actually, as has been said earlier by my colleagues, really, it's children particularly are blind to all this. Shouldn't we all be blind? Because it's really highlighting differences as opposed to people as equal. Comments?
Okay, do you want to respond?
Just brief responses on those. I think the percentages of not obtained apologies, there is a figure missing, but I think without adding it up, you're around 40 to 50%. I think it goes back to what I said before around people's willingness to declare. Sometimes in organisations it's a cultural issue. They believe that if they put something onto a system, their manager will have access to it. They might not want their manager to have access to it. HR might have access to it. We tend to get higher declaration rates in the staff surveys that we do once every couple of years, because people see those as more truly anonymous, if you like, and are happier to declare. So there is a trust and cultural issue. Not that we've ever had a problem with how we've used the statistics, but it's perception. Absolutely right around declaring other genders. And that's something that we're working on. And I think sex versus gender, it's the word that's used in the Equalities Act, but absolutely fair challenge. And no, we're not discriminating against males. just for the record. We're obviously doing some work around gender pay gap. We're looking at the types of roles and whether we can attract more males or females, because some of our professions are male-dominated, female-dominated, etc. And can we change that? Okay.
Okay, we've had a good discussion. Rosita just wants to raise a couple of text queries, and
Yes.
then we'll thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and I actually think has been a wonderful discussion, and what I particularly liked about it is that the point that came over, it is equality for all people, because I went to a Holocaust Memorial Day, and it was pointed out that the problem starts when you point out any kind of differences. But and everything was said, but I'd just like to raise 2 points, please. It's page 27, and it is the lead member's foreword. And not wishing to tell her what to say, but you might want to discuss it, because by the time this strategy is going to be in full format, if we're looking at the 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraph down, it is the strategy, blah, 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 the uncertainty over United Kingdom leaving the European Union. And you might want to address that at the time. And my other point is on page 49, and in Objective 5, you are talking about developing an action plan to improve recruitment, retention and progression to grade 13 of BAME employees. Now, I'm questioning that, because if you're going back to page 46, we have got 15.5% of BAME employees, and grade 13 plus is already up to 14.6%. So therefore, why are we then creating an action plan to reprove? And also, is that not, where is then the action plan of everything else? So just a point. And if we are talking about equalities, I think when you're looking at the report in the end, to have a bit more of a balance. For instance, I've noticed that there are about 10, 11 mentions about LBGT and Stonewall, but there's only 3 mention about BAME, in the report. So I think that should be balanced, that we are looking at everything in an equal point. And with that, thank you very much. Really good discussion and good report.
You take those points on board? Just wording. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. You're going to Cabinet with this in due course? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Hope we've made some constructive suggestions for amendments and changes. Right, can we move to the medium-term financial strategy monitoring report, page 67, agenda item 9. We're joined now by Chris Tambini, Director of Corporate Resources, and Declan Keenan, Assistant Director of Strategic Finance and Property. Right, is this the last monitoring report for this financial year? Would you like to introduce it? Who's going to start?
Thank you, Chair. So we last reported in period 6 when the revenue overspend was a mere £1 million. Unfortunately, this has increased to £4 million now. We're at period 10. I'll cover it in a little bit more detail, but the main reason is SEND, which hopefully sort of most members have picked up as we highlighted that through the MTFS process, what was going on there. And the capital programme as well has also kind of slipped. It was 20 million when we last reported, and that's up to about 50 million, and that's a mixture of the large scheme at Lutterworth, but also the waste transfer station project, which was dependent on finding a site. So what I intend to do is just talk through summarise the revenue position, and happy to take questions and do the same with the capital section of the report as we normally do, if that's okay. Okay, so the first bit, so I won't go through sort of paragraph by paragraph, I'll just give you sort of a bit of an overview. So touched on SEND as the main problem, and that's kind of, as you'll have seen, it was always forecast that the demand was going to exceed the level of grant that we were receiving from government, but that demand has continued to increase. And what we always see is as that demand goes up, the cost per place increases as well. So you get that kind of double hit, as it were. So that's what's happened. So and that happened sort of a couple of months ago. That sort of increase in projection. Although it's been sort of stable over the last kind of couple of months, it is still a significant long-term risk. The Department for Education is engaged in this because it's a real big sort of national issue, and they have started giving sort of strengthening guidance about their level of intervention, which is kind of on one hand positive, but in truth, until it's been through external audit, which is where it kind of ran aground last year, and also there's a requirement on us to have good approved recovery plans. There is still expected to be sort of a requirement for the council to continue to direct resources to SEND. So it's going to be it will be a recurring theme through the course of the year. Even if they help support with additional grant, I think the expectation will still be there. We find additional capital, additional sort of project resource to kind of help to try and bring this under control. So that's just to sort of explain the figure. That is £8 million above the level of grant that we get in the current year. The level of increased grant next year is only £5.5 million. So at the moment there isn't a government offer that resolves this for us. Plus there'll be extra growth. Moving to the main sort of local authority budget, Children and Family Service was the main overspender last time, and it continues to be. That overspend's increased by about £1 million over the last sort of 4 months, and it's primarily sort of the social care placements that's gone up. So the main drivers between that sort of £3.7 million overspend is it's primarily workforce at about just shy of £3 million, placements coming at about £2 million, and asylum-seeking children or unaccompanied asylum-seeking children at £500,000. There is an offsetting saving on sort of the wellbeing service, which is a mixture of vacancies and other things, but quite a lot of sort of pressure on that service in terms of financially. Adults is very much a similar picture to what it was last time, 2.8 million sort of under at the moment, and that is a mixture between kind of non-frontline sort of staffing and care services. Obviously with the scale of the budget, the care services kind of it's just a sort of a tiny sort of correction, as it were, to an original forecast. But overall it's pretty similar all year, to be honest, the adults forecast. Public health pretty small, so I won't go into that one. In ENT, it's 2 million again. That's crept up a little bit from where it was at mid-year. It won't be any surprise to you that the main driver in there is the SCND costs, and that's a mixture of kind of the placement costs, which is reflecting the additional children coming through children's, but also we've had this delayed savings due to the judicial review that happened last year. So there's been a few bits in there, but also again, probably not a surprise to members, there's some additional costs going in there with sort of flooding and related issues as they do the investigations and the initial responses in there. So hopefully sort of people are sort of familiar with that. Chief execs, I won't go into it. It's a range of sort of relatively small things in the scheme of the council budget. I will pick up, although corporate resources is showing a sort of a net zero, just wanted to sort of highlight in there, there's quite a lot of pressure on the commercial services at the moment. There were forecasts, obviously the ambition was to grow the sort of services, and there has been sort of some success in that, but they found it very difficult, sort of, the tail end of last financial year and the current financial year. So they're about 1.4 million behind. Unfortunately, I apologise, there's a typo in the report. It talks about a profit of 1.8 million targeting, but only only achieving 0.4 million. Actually, there's £1 million missing off both of those. The target at the start of the year was to try and get 2.8 million profit, but unfortunately we're only getting 1.4 million. So it's still worthwhile what we're trying to do. It's just that sort of growth ambition hasn't been delivered. In terms of how corporate resources come in on balance, it's because IT services has had savings in for sort of next year. They've brought those forward and held on to some other bits and pieces. And then also our insurance claims history has been really, really good over the last few years. So we've just been starting to sort of reduce the level of reserves that we do hold, and those reserves come from an annual contribution. So it is an ongoing benefit to the council. Other areas in that sort of department type areas, contingency for inflation. There was a message that was sort of had last time that the residential fee review, it came in sort of out, it was just before the summer, higher than we'd initially budgeted, but that's kind of old news as it were. Other items, just sort of scanning through the report, the central items area, again, it's similar to what it was. It's a mixture of sort of interest balances, ESPO income, but also prior year adjustments. The prior adjustments being the majority of it, and it's just kind of, it's housekeeping. It's quite a big figure, but it's housekeeping on £400 million of spend. So that's why it's kind of, it comes through there. And it's one of those areas that we do kind of keep sort of trying to tackle and bring it down to support the reporting. You'll also notice we have a contribution to the general fund in there, and that's just because the SEND money is real money. If we don't get the grant, we've got to find the cash from somewhere. So that's the way of sort of doing it, through that general fund. And it kind of makes it real for you as well, that it is directing resources away from other services. So that means when you tot all that up, it's about £4 million. It's not ideal. I've touched on the capital slippage, and that's how we can kind of afford it this year. We're not having to dip into sort of that capital funding as much this year. That obviously only kind of deals with it for 1 year, but because we knew about these sort of issues before we'd set the MTFS, we have incorporated that £4 million in next year's MTFS. It does mean we kind of set us up. There is a few things that have crept out, so we are a little bit behind in terms of as we start off next year, but we think it's manageable because you could see the writing was on the wall, as it were. Things were starting to tighten up a bit, so we have held back a bit more contingency than we normally do through the MTFS in terms of our all-risk contingency. That's all I was going to say on revenue. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So are you saying on the SND that, with DFE looking at it, that the outcome, I'm not clear, is the outcome likely to be a tightening of the rules in terms of the assessments, and therefore it will suppress demand, or is the outcome going to be more money? Or we don't know.
Could be a bit of both. They were doing a review. Okay, it launched before Christmas, was it? They started doing a review, which in theory is that tightening of the rules. So but it'd have to be sort of a policy change at DFE. But it's also, they are talking about whether it's more money as well. Now, whether they're fully clocked how big an issue this is, I think they can just sort of work it through. We're not sure, but it's expected to be both sort of fronts.
Timing for this? Yeah.
I mean, the review, I think it was announced last summer, I think, and it was due. There was supposed to be an interim report at Christmas, which didn't appear. So it's kind of gone back a bit. So maybe Easter we might get something. The other thing I'll add is that they did issue, the DFE did issue some additional financial guidelines, which in effect mandated local authorities to carry forward the deficit. So we can't actually use other resources to offset that SEND deficit. We have to carry it forward. And if you want to use those other resources, we have to ask permission of the Secretary of State. So they brought in some other rules. And the reason for that is, I think that the government is slightly concerned that if local authorities kind of bail it out using other resources, there will be an impact clearly on other services. So it is a big issue nationally.
And on the placements budget, you're concerned, we're all concerned that that's increasing on page 69, paragraph 16 and 17. We can't help making the point that, of course, one of the issues is the accommodation provision all now has to be tendered and secured, doesn't it? Whereas before we did have accommodation in-house. We've gone away from that. In adult social care, we're now going back into bricks and mortar and hotel costs. Do you think children and families will need to look at whether this would be more efficient if it was some provision in-house?
Yeah, you're right in terms of the adults and the SKIP programme, that we are looking at the same thing for children's as well. It might be a slightly different model. I know we've got this innovation partnership with Bernardo's, so it could be that we end up kind of owning the kind of bricks and mortar, and Bernardo's provide the services, children's services out of the building. But it is something we're looking at, because it's a similar kind of market to the adult social care, kind of dominated by a few kind of providers and a little bit kind of flaky financially.
I mean, there's been quite a bit of media coverage on the, particularly the 16 plus provision, and looking at that nationally, not just in Leicestershire. But there were some shocking figures of the amount of money per week that are being charged for little more than bed and breakfast or some converted house. And it beggars belief, the amount of money. And they were just being spot purchased because the local authority had to place a child in there at very, very short notice. So you're always going to be beholden to these companies. So if we are looking at that, I think that's a very positive move.
It is exactly the same logic as on adults. You need to make an intervention in the market, otherwise it is basically a seller's market. And so one way of doing it is to use the model where we still use external providers, but we actually provide the actual bricks and mortar. So yeah.
Good. Terry Einan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. It is, it's got big issues in, and most of them seem quite depressing. So I won't go on the big issues. I'm going on the tiny issue on page 74, which is the Snibston Country Park Future Strategy, where we've got slippage in the land remediation.
Hang on. You've gone to capital. The officers haven't introduced. Can you come back on that? We're just doing revenue at the moment. Is that all right? Peter Bedford.
Because it's very difficult, we've got the budget today, to ask questions on forward planning. It's obviously very topical, the coronavirus and dealing with that. Just wondered if you could give a comment on in terms of impact of that financially and what provisions there are.
In terms of coronavirus, I think there'll be a limited impact in terms of this year's budget, but depending on what happens, I think there will be an impact on next year's financial position. You've probably got kind of 4 different areas. You've got kind of buying things. I don't know. There's only so much antiseptic gel and soap you can buy, and that's not going to be a particularly kind of massive impact on that. No, that's true. And you probably can't buy it anyway. But there will be some other probably more expensive things we need to buy, like laptops and things like that. So there will be to enable home working. So there'll be, but again, that'll be fairly limited. The things that worry me more are things like our income. So if you look at things like school food income, catering income, that's about £12 million. If schools close for a period of time, we're going to get a hit in terms of kind of income. There could well be impact on income in terms of business rates and impact on income in terms of council tax as well. So you've kind of got that impact. You've also got impact in terms of savings programmes. We're not too worried in terms of next year's saving programmes. There's a few kind of big things in there which you think we can do regardless. But clearly, if you've got 20% of the workforce off, there's going to be slippage in terms of developing those programmes for future years. So again, that does kind of concern me in terms of, I suppose, the year after next, in terms of kind of what savings we might well get out. And I suppose an example of that would be something like the digital programme, where we've got resources that are focused on digital and trying to kind of make ourselves more productive. That's clearly kind of a complicated programme. But I think we're going to, if the worst case kind of scenario kind of plays out, those kind of resources have to be kind of more focused on the BAU of IT, for example. And you can use that example for lots of different kind of savings proposals that are dotted around the county council. And I think the other one, which is kind of a little bit more unknown, is you've got, where we've got a heavily kind of outsourced social care market. We've got the government kind of making noises around kind of mandating things like sick pay, etc. There could well be a knock-on impact of that in terms of the county council kind of budget as well. So there's a huge amount of unknowns, but I dare say there will be an impact in terms of next year's position.
Have that. David Bill.
On that subject, Chairman, personally, I think it will be a massive impact, not just on local authorities, but on the rest of on the whole community. And I think the pressure is going to be on us, pressures on the whole community to try to recover from this dreadful situation that we appear to be heading into. Could I just ask, in general terms though, and Peter touched on this, that with today's budget, how much of today's budget is going to impact really on the conclusions that we're coming to in this report? Did you have any sense that there's going to be relief for local authorities who face the problems outlined in here, or have you any sense at all of what we've got to look forward to this afternoon?
Declan might want to add. I mean, it's kind of impossible. We'll know within a couple of hours what's in the budget anyway. I mean, what they're saying is there's going to be kind of a lot of money around for infrastructure. So, I mean, which is actually pretty helpful. You look at the size of our capital programme, kind of 600 million over kind of 4 years. So hopefully that would be helpful. And it would be helpful in terms of if some sort of big ticket items in terms of flooding money came through, that would be very helpful. In terms of us not having to kind of borrow to do some of those investments. But I mean, it is going to be a COVID-19 kind of budget, isn't it? So we're going to have to wait and see in terms of what's in it. I mean, there might well be some kind of tax relief that the government wants to throw at certain things. That might relate to business rates. I'm assuming that if that happens, that we'll get kind of compensated in some way. But I'll say it's difficult to second guess, but I dare say there'll be an impact. I don't think there'll be anything in there that kind of helps out in terms of our immediate issues around things like SEN, children's social care. I'm not expecting anything in there that helps out. I think that's more of a spending review kind of decision.
Okay, should we go to paragraph 38 then, and the capital programme, and then Terry Einan can ask her question again.
I wasn't going to go into too much detail purely because I suppose the common cause of the variance is very similar. It's easier if you have a look on page 87, appendix 3, and the kind of common word across all this is slippage, and it's kind of, you'll see every single kind of every single department has slipped on where its sort of updated budget was for the year, and we've slipped back into bad habits a little bit, where we had started to get better in terms of sort of not being quite so overly optimistic on things like partnership agreements, funding agreements, planning permissions, and you can see what's happened. The original budget, the bottom left figure, 139 million, and then we've added to that until it's become 170 million on the updated budget, and we've kind of got nowhere near that. So the big lesson from this is we need to kind of, as part of the out-term planning, recast the 2021 budget, because if all we do is we move £50 million from this year to next year, we'll be in the same position again. So it's kind of, there's quite a, I don't know, there's, like I say, it's kind of a bit of a self-inflicted problem, but if you go through the detail of it, you'll hear a lot of things on slippage, and it's all about factors that are outside of control, whether it's kind of like planning permission or partner agreements. So I wasn't going to go into detail in terms of that. The other bits I was going to pick up on capital, if you turn back to page 74, just highlight the capital receipts. That's about 6 million behind. It's not an issue in terms of practical terms in terms of the current year, because we're obviously slipped, so we don't actually need that cash at the moment. In terms of whether that causes an ongoing problem, at the moment it's not felt. Part of the reason things are getting held up is because they're just property services trying to maximise those receipts, so it's getting tied up with kind of housing schemes and things like that. So as they're trying to maximise it, you can't always get the cash in as quickly as you want, so they're having a bit of a look at that forecast, but it's been incorporated in the MTFS, so it won't impinge the programme itself. The other thing I wanted to highlight was we do report quarterly the Corporate Asset Investment Fund, just highlighting there that it is only the revenue returns that are being shown there as opposed to kind of the combined capital. The results are pretty good. It's 3.3 in the table, but you'll see there's a big development line in there which actually doesn't have any sort of return on that. So it'd be 5.2 without it. If you look at the sort of the national benchmarks on property at the moment, they look fairly grim in truth, and that's because of retail. Retail capital values are tanking, revenue returns are right down. So because we've got very little retail exposure, with sort of our property portfolio is going to be sort of doing well is doing well at the moment. That's all I was going to touch on capital. Happy to take questions.
Okay, there are some worrying slippage in some of these, which could have impact on service provision. So, for example, the depot replacement need a short-term option because there's no prospect of a new depot until the distributor road is built, and that obviously is required for winter maintenance. So that's quite worrying. That you do get the impression with some of these that some of these issues should have been foreseeable at the beginning. I remember on the Watermead Bridge, the leader and the city mayor went down and had a great photo session. We're going to build a footway and cycle bridge over the Watermead Country Park to connect the two. Now we learn that one of the landowners might not wish to be involved. Well, again, shouldn't that have been sorted out before it got... You do wonder on some of these, some quite basic issues before it gets to the point. Well, maybe you need a list which you're working on, but it doesn't actually get put in the programme until you are absolutely ready to deliver it, and all these sorts of issues. Have we got the process right on some of these?
I think, to be honest, it's one of those we slipped back on, because we did do exactly what you just said a couple of years ago, where we'd set basically three categories. One was kind of the ideas, the other one was kind of projects that got the go-ahead but didn't have the approval to actually start sort of, or the right permissions in place to start this sort of spend, and then the kind of live projects where you can kind of truly monitor where they are against budget. So, to be honest, it's one of those things that we'd got better on and then slipped back, because I do agree on some of them. You just look at it and it does feel a bit of a sort of a self-inflicted problem instead of, you know, it was very foreseeable. I mean, the Watermead, I do feel for them a bit on that one, because they had conversations with the landowners and had the informal agreement, and then I think it was very much at the last minute that had changed. But the problem is when that keeps happening half a dozen times, the process can't be right. So.
Okay. Terry Inan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, to the little irritating problem of Snibston, which just seems to have slipped again, and works to remediate the land have been put on hold while the site is investigated for potential use by the social care investment plan, which seems a sensible thing to do, but I think the question in my mind is, has anyone in properties sat down and done the maths to work out whether all the money that we've spent, which is actually quite a lot on the headstocks and knocking down the former Discovery Museum and so on, you know, has this entire strategy, is there any, you know, is it actually as disastrous as it looks to me financially? So that would be an interesting set of sums to do. So that's one. And then I wasn't sure why the clarifications from what these clarifications with the district council were, and how that has ended up with us slipping. You know, clearly having done what we've done to the Discovery Park, you know, we clearly need to get on and tidy this up rather than let it all slip.
In terms of the work on Snips, obviously, in terms of the kind of the work that's currently started in terms of the country park and the cafe and the education centre, that's all underway and it's all started. So that should be open next July. I think that's the opening date. The bit where there's a bit of slippage is the bit kind of the former kind of car park, where we're looking at the potential. We were going to just sell that for housing. That was the original plan. But on the back of the kind of work we're doing around the social care investment programme, we are looking at whether we should have an extra care facility and a specialist dementia unit there, given the location, which seems quite a good location for it. So to be honest, that has come along a little bit late in the day. But to be honest, before we kind of sold the land for housing, we thought we'd better investigate it. And those investigations are kind of ongoing. We're hopefully going to make a decision fairly soon on that. But it does seem sensible to pause the sale and have a look at that, so there will be an impact on the capital receipt. In terms of the overall, does it make sense to do what we did to Snibston? Again, kind of going back, trying to remember exactly what the revenue cost of Snibston, I think it was about $750,000 a year cost to run the Snibston Discovery Park. That money has been saved, and it's been saved for a number of years now. The costs of what we got there now, which will be, you know, a children's play area, a cafe, which will hopefully be kind of actually make a bit of money, it will be a lot less than that. And you know, it was a significant subsidy that went into the Discovery Park, and what we're putting in there is a bit more self-sustaining. The mountain bike track again should hopefully make a bit of money for the county council and be appreciated by the people who use it. Yeah.
Have you looked at the ongoing maintenance costs of the scheduled ancient monument? I appreciate that we did put lots of lovely paint on it and it's supposed to last 25 years, but I'm being told by some of the heritage volunteers that there is deterioration in things like gas pipes and so on. This is not going to be cost neutral, keeping this thing up, and we've got no income for it at the moment.
Honestly, I am concerned about Snibston because I think we spent about £1.4 million on painting it and some maintenance about probably 6-7 years ago. I think it's about that order. So the ongoing maintenance is a major concern. And I do think we need to have a think about kind of how, with the rest of the site, we can look at how we can make it a little bit more self-sustaining. It's listed, or it's it's a Scheduled Ages monument. There's a lot of obligations that go with that, and a lot of costs would go with that. So we do need to think about the rest of the site. So I do share that kind of concern, and it is something we are looking at.
Okay, Terry Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions really on Appendix 4, starting at page 89. I recently, as Chair of Adults Communities, visited the Records Office along with the support member for Adults Communities to have a good look round, having previously visited the Collections Hub. Now, what concerns me about this is that the Records Office and the Collections Hub have been de-linked, whereas originally they were one off. And secondly, and this is really a question to the Scrutiny Commissioners really, is that, as Chairman of Adult and Scrutiny, I look at what we might be able to do with the building, but then it disappears into a black hole because it goes off to assets, and therefore it sits across two areas. So I just wonder if this is an area where a small subgroup of this committee perhaps should be formed to look at what is going to happen with both the Records Office and the Collections Hub, because I think part of it's being driven by costs, whereas I'm concerned, having visited the Records Office, that we're not actually looking at what the Records Office might have to accommodate vis-a-vis the costs we're entering into. So I just share that as a thought, because I have a concern that we might end up with the wrong solution without proper scrutiny. On the second point, which questions on, two questions. One on the County Council Vehicle Programme. There is nothing here about saying, has it been considered in the light of our green agenda? So I just wonder where we are on that. And the other one on the Croft Office block improvements. So what improvements were we looking to do? And what savings would you ever get from an office block improvement that caused us to stop it? Because I'm not aware of what savings an office block would give you unless we were renting it out to someone else. And surely that again should have been foreseen beforehand, that the savings weren't there when we originally scoped the project.
On your point about a review, we'll agenda that for the next Commissioners meeting and discuss it, because as you rightly say, it does cross several areas. But this project is very much being led by the leader, and I'm sure he will have a view about what you've just raised in terms of some kind of scrutiny of that process, but we'll pick it up and discuss it. Okay. So on the other points, on the schemes, can you respond to that?
So on the Croft, we'll have to get back to you on that. All I can remember was it was originally set out as a sort of spend to save scheme, whether it's consolidation or something like that. But something has changed, and I can't remember what that is. It's kind of derailed what it is, but we'll let you know what that is. But the saving that hasn't been that won't be delivered isn't huge in the scheme of things anyway. It's kind of the tens of thousands kind of order of magnitude, but we'll let you know.
364,000.
No, that's the saved capital. So that's going to be the investment.
Yeah.
So it's the other side of that. In terms of the vehicle replacement programme, they are considering the environmental impact. It'll be wrapped up in the wider environmental strategy. But obviously, there's that balancing point between kind of the type of vehicles that we do purchase when they're suitable for when the tip over point is right. But it's a rolling programme. It's in there each year, so they have got multiple bites to the cherry. But it'll come back as part of that environmental strategy.
I think that was just my point, that at some points, presumably our vehicle purchasing strategy should be scrutinised somewhere. Now, I don't know if it's E&T or whether it's this committee, but I'm just concerned that we're going ahead purchasing vehicles without a policy on how we're going to adapt those vehicles for the green agenda. That was all.
Well, isn't that being looked at as part of the review of the environment strategy? It's in there, isn't it?
Yeah, it should be, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. David Bill.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Various references in the report and in the appendices to the Hinckley Hub 4.9 million scheme. Work is expected to start in March 2020. Could outside of this meeting, could I be given some information about what is to happen, or what is likely to happen, to the residual land which is not required for the additional land take at the former Lidl supermarket premises? What in fact has happened is that for the last 6 months or so, we've lost the use of a car park there, and this is adding to the congestion problems in the centre of town. Outside of this meeting, if I could just be given a sort of some more information about the potential for bringing that car park back into use, it would be much appreciated.
We'll have to go to E&T to get that information for you. Okay. Bill Bolter.
Thank you. Yeah, most of my questions have been answered actually, but regarding Snibston, what's been proposed now has no impact on the new country park, has it? First one. And the second one is that we noticed that on the same site we're now looking at putting our own social care investment plan in there to build something for ourselves, possibly. So there's a loss of a capital receipt because it was going to be sold for housing. So that's been taken care of from the MTFS, I assume. But I just want confirmation of that. Then we come to the Records Office, and Mr. Richardson's already answered the question on that. But I'm a bit concerned that we're looking at a new building. Well, we know what is required for a Records Office for keeping records. It's been established for many years. So why are we suddenly looking at something, having to really look at it, when we already know what conditions are required to keep records? It doesn't seem to add up to me that we're now re-looking at it, unless it's something I'm not aware of, I've not been told. But anyway, I'll leave you to think about that one.
So just picking up in terms of the impact on Snibston Country Park, there will be an impact on Snibston Country Park in terms of what we're proposing, because there will be a kind of a mountain bike track that will kind of go through the park. And actually, I mean, I don't know whether anybody's been in there recently. I mean, it does need a bit of work, so there'll be some kind of cosmetic kind of tidying up of the park as well. So hopefully it'll be an improvement in terms of the country park. You're right. There could be an impact on capital receipts if we use some of that land for extra care or a dementia unit. But the whole point of the social care investment programme is to generate revenue savings. So we'll be kind of balancing the loss of the capital receipt against the revenue savings that could materialise for the county council, and clearly we'll bring those things, but both in view of the business case. The Records Office, the current plan for the Records Office is it will be kind of in that kind of bit of space at the end of County Hall. So the work we're doing is not really around kind of what is the Records Office. It's more in terms of trying to get a design done in terms of how that could work in terms of that kind of bit of space at the end, and how it could kind of connect back into the County Hall and what size, etc.
When the Records Office was moved to Wixton, a great deal of work has taken place on that building to make sure the environment to keep the records in was actually correct. And some bits was done below ground for various reasons. To my knowledge, the building we were talking about has got no below ground facilities. So you've got to create that environment for maintaining the records. And that's an extremely expensive operation with ongoing revenue costs. So I'm confused now about what is happening with the Records Office and about the physical and mechanical ways we're going to actually preserve the records.
No, I mean the business the business case for the Records Office is around. I mean, I've been around the Records Office recently as well, and it's basically it's running out of space, and it's not big enough. And if you look at the cost of actually making it bigger in terms of the current location, because it's on split levels, isn't it? You've got to dig out a load of earth at the back. It's actually really quite expensive to do that. So if you look at, I can't remember the exact figures, but it didn't make sense. So it's probably better value to just build a new one. So the proposals are in effect to build a new one on this site at the end of County Hall. So he's building a brand new building that will be connected in to this building. So I think I'll just ask Declan. We've got 10. Yeah, we've got 10 million in the capital programme to do that, and that's been in the capital programme I think for a couple of years now. So the stage we're at is we're about to appoint architects to actually do some detailed work around what that building might look like. And it will be, you know, you're right, it's all climate controlled, and it will be a big kind of concrete kind of block, but it will have the capacity to last for, contain records for, for a number of years.
I think you'll find, Chair, it's going to cost a great deal more than £10 million at the end of the day, but we'll
come out, won't it, at the point, and then a decision will have to be made to balance the two up. Unless we do that design work, we won't know. Okay. Right, that's dealt with everyone's questions. Rosita, you wanted to finish up?
Yeah, last but not least, general statement, if you indulge me, please. We've had about 6 of these monitoring reports now, and every time we have a very, very detailed discussion on the capital programme. Now, I know everything on its own merit, and we have debated the Record Office and whatever, but at the end effect, every time these capital overspends have stayed the same, and there hasn't been much activity. Now, Councillor Galton just raised a very valid point, and Declan said we are getting better at it. Well, with all due respect, I don't think getting better at it is good enough. I mean, we're talking about not having enough money, we're talking about public finance, and to me it somehow seems that this isn't just flukes or anything that just happens. In my opinion, it could be a performance issue. And if it is a performance issue, at Scrutiny, I think we should be asking why and whether it could be looked into, because a lot of these things seem to be over the same portfolios and whatever. So I was wondering, what can I leave the thought with you? What can we do to look into to address this, that it isn't a performance issue that is actually holding this up? Because it disturbs me in a way that these things keep coming up and nothing is changing.
I mean, I think we do accept that, and as Declan said, I think the key issue is that we're being too optimistic in terms of what we can deliver. We've got a huge capital programme. It's 140 million in the current year. We have delivered probably the most we've ever delivered in terms of capital expenditure. But I think, as an organisation, we are too optimistic. I mean, we're clearly not optimistic, and we probably need to kind of get people to be a little bit more pessimistic and realistic in terms of what they can deliver. And when we kind of when we look at the money that's currently unspent in this current year, and we start to think, well, actually, what will be delivered next year, we will update it. We will make sure that it's far more realistic in terms of what we can deliver. So yeah, I'd accept what you're saying. We just need to be far more realistic, and we will be.
If I may come back, is there any possibility throughout your department that there is more emphasis on, being more realistic in the first place, and to monitor performance and output of certain departments? Because after all, sometimes it's very easily said, oh, well, there is only a few million slippage. But it is a real serious issue. We're talking over 40 million. And I think internally a process has to be set up that measures performance and output. So, I can leave that thought with you, can't I?
Right, okay. Well, thank you very much. We will obviously continue to monitor this and the capital programme, keep a close eye on it going forward. Thank you for presenting that. We note that. That's just what we're being asked to do. The date of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 8th of April at 10:30. We've got a lot of business on that agenda, and I'm quite sure we'll have to go into the afternoon. So, if you want to prepare your diaries accordingly. And so we'll make sure there's a break for lunch, and then we will get the business done.
Clues about what's on the agenda?
Oh, Rosemary? Yeah, we just referred to the environment strategy, which is off the back of the climate change agenda.
Why is that not ENT?
That's coming because it is much wider than just ENT. It is for the whole council.
There's the police and crime.
Oh, yes, we've got the annual.
Police and crime.
Mr. Old is coming as now the representative on the police and crime panel. You always enjoy this every year. It used to be Joe Orson. Present the work of what they've done on the police and crime panel, and an opportunity to raise any issues. Now, I was going to say it would be helpful if you've got any questions around policing to let us have those in advance, because if we simply put those to Ivan, he's only going to have to go away and try and get answers through the panel. Whereas if there's any specific issues we could feed to him, he may be able to, through the Police and Crime Commissioner, get some answers by the time he comes in.
Big changes took place today, about
Traditional, back to traditional.
Yeah. So if you've got any questions, and I think you raise a good point, Kevin, that it certainly would be helpful to have some kind of map, at least, of the new, what do they call them, the policing units, local policing units, the operation, and who's in charge, so members know who to go to, who's the inspector for that. That would certainly be helpful to have. Yep.
Could I suggest that we ask that the questions from the committee here arrive no later than, say, Friday the 3rd of April? It's no good getting the questions here for Tuesday the 7th.
Sorry, are you talking now questions in relation to having Mr. Old on?
Yes. You suggested that we got any questions.
Yes.
And I think we shouldn't say, oh, I sent my question in at 4 o'clock on Tuesday
No,
afternoon.
good point.
So
Okay.
I think it should come in early. And the other question I was going to ask you is, as it's Easter, are you providing the Easter eggs? Because it's Easter week.
Am I providing Easter eggs?
Yes, it's Easter week.
Would you like me to?
Well, it would be nice to have a mini one, wouldn't it?
I'll see what I can do, but
Is that under
Dr.
Chairman's
Felton says
duties?
some people give up sweets and chocolate. Okay.
There's until the 13th.
Right, so the next meeting is Wednesday the 8th of April at 10:30. Thank you.
Thank you.
Close the meeting.